For this lesson, we need to talk about how to make a percent into a decimal and how we can make a decimal into a percent. It follows one rule, and well, not everybody, but a lot of people try to make it a lot harder than it has to be. If it's a percent, there's always a decimal that's hidden right there if you don't see one, and all you have to do is slide it 2 times to the left. So this would be the same as 0.50. That's it. That's all we have to do to make a percent into a decimal. So here's where the decimal is to the percent, and we would slide it 2 to the left, and that makes it 0.13. 65% becomes 0.65, and 93% becomes 0.93. That's it. That's the rule. How many times? 2 to the left. It's just as easy when we're talking about what we do to make a decimal into a percent. We just slide it 2 to the right. We just slide it back 2 spots. So this becomes 22%. Slide it back 2 to the right, and this becomes 89%. Same here. 30.38 becomes 38%. And this becomes 74%. Okay, so let's talk about the ones that cause problems. The ones that cause problems are where people try to come up with an exception or another little rule. But if you stop and think about it, we only move these decimals 2 spots, and it's just a matter of what direction. So if you can keep the direction straight, you're okay. So when we look at 100% and everybody's like, well, gee, now it's got 3 numbers, what do I do? Well, when it's a percent, we move it back 2 to the left. So that's all I'm going to do is I'm going to move it back 2 to the left. And that stays right there, so it becomes 1 or 1.0. That's it. We move it back 2 to the left. So whenever I see 93.5%, when that decimal's not in its normal spot where it's invisible, sitting behind all the numbers, who cares? We just move it 2 to the left. So it equals 0.935. Same rule, right? Back 2 to the left. And what happens if there's not enough numbers? Well, if I move it in front of that 8 and I say it's 0.8, I've made a mistake, but stop and think about it. Every single time we've moved it how many times? Going from percent to decimal, how many times? You can see right there, every single time it's 2 times. So for this one, it's not good enough to move it just once. It violates the rule. We've got to move it twice. And then that means we've got to put in a placeholder 0, and it would become 0.08. Now, don't overthink it. For these decimals, what do? We always moved it right. And how many spots always? 2. So let's just go do that, and let's not overthink it. It's going to be moving 2 to the right, because that's where it would wind up, right? Oh, and I'm sorry, I forgot the percentage sign. That's important. So this would become 62.5%. And this one, I know it's weird, but we have to follow the rule. So it would become 105%. So as long as you know that when you're switching from a percent to decimal or decimal to percent, we always move it 2 places. Just make sure that you're sure which direction you should go in, and you'll be fine. But always 2 places, and if you need to, add in that placeholder.